All right, so we've thought about these things, but what does it really look like? So let's take a look at what a blended learning or distance learning session really, a model for what that could look like. All right, so your lesson format. If students begin with pre-work, something that prepares them for their lifetime together, and I think that those of you that are new to the course, that maybe you got a great opportunity to see that this time because you did have pre-learning, that pre-work that you needed to do. And I think that you can see the value that if you hadn't done that, that you would have been a step behind as we went into the work on day one. But then we go into the live lesson activities, and then we have some kind of student follow-up, and then we also need to think about assessment. So let's jump in on each one of those things. So the pre-work, that's where you can offer your greeting, your guidance. Sometimes it's video work. It's where you can offer students a hook or a launch, something that will engage them and get them interested. Those do exist in the lessons, and many of them you can use them exactly as they are. A few of them are going to need some adaptation if students are working at home. And then direct instruction, whether you're getting it from a video recording that someone else made or whether you're creating something for students. Remember, the power of a recorded piece of instruction is that a student can go back over it and over it and over it. They can use it, they can keep it they can access it later when they need it. It's incredibly powerful. Think about this opportunity for direct instruction as perhaps being even better than in person. And then tech support, right? You want students to go out and play around with tools that they're going to need to use in other activities. So in your live lesson, take this chance to work with that relationship, to check in on your students, check in on their well-being as well as how it's going mathematically. So take both approaches to that. Students, this is when they can discuss, when they can collaborate, and it's when you as a teacher can offer them intervention if they need additional supports. If a student's struggling, take that time when some of your students are collaborating and working on a big group task, maybe you can sit down one-to-one with a student and help them out. Students follow up, they can practice what they've learned or talked about in the live session. They can reflect on it and use it to make connections. They can use it as enrichment. Okay, you got the hang of this, now what can you do with it? Let's take it a step further. And again, this is where you can offer that student choice, where you can say, this is my minimum, I want you to pick one of these things, but we have these 4 things, so if you want to pick more, you can. So allow students that choice in student follow-up. And then far as assessment goes, throughout the course, you're going to want to do it in small chunks. For a lesson in very small chunks, maybe for a topic, a little bit bigger chunk, but still you're looking at a very confined structure of learning as far as that goes. That makes sure that your success criteria are what's really focused on in the unit. Creating self-checking activities for your students. Desmos is awesome for that, but there are many other ways that you can do that as well. Students to self-assess. The research says that a student who assesses themselves does better than a student who only receives external feedback. So give students that opportunity to assess their own learning. And then ongoing formative assessment from you. And I added this as the 4th step, but I really am not sure that that's where it belongs. I kind of think it belongs all sprinkled out through the rest of it. So assessment has its place in pre-work, in the live lessons, and in follow-up. All right, so your work to kind of cement this in your head, to give it a try, is to take and do your follow-up activity, is to pick one lesson. Hopefully, you dived in on one topic as part of your pre-work for today. So take a lesson, any lesson in the course. You're going to sign up for it the same way that you have in the 2 previous sessions. And this time you're going to think about adapting it for either blended or distance learning. And there's a template in Moodle for you that looks like this, in which you first of all look at the content and practice standards that are in the lesson. you think about what part of the lesson should become pre-work. What would you use in a live session? What would students follow up as? So that's the basic model. But then also think about, for teacher preparation, what will you have to do that is different than you would do in the published materials? What extra needs to be taken care of? What other considerations do you have to have? And then what follow-up would you do that might be different than you would do if you were doing it in a traditional setting? And so also in your materials, there's an example of a lesson where I did this. And this is pretty small, but know that it's there in your materials. You can look at it. I identified the standards. Just the way that I did it, the items in bold would be things that students would do or activities. And I mentioned each one. Is it adapted or is it pretty much the same as it would normally be? In the two bottom ones where it's the teacher preparation and the teacher follow-up, the ones that have the arrows are things that you wouldn't do or wouldn't need to do as much of in a traditional classroom, but the other things you would be doing in your classroom no matter what. They are things that are just basic parts of your preparation for instruction and follow-up with students. Okay, so in the Moodle, there's the template and there's also this piece, so you can take a look at that and use it as a model. Oh, and you don't actually have to develop the activities here, right? If you're saying develop a Desmos or make a video or whatever, all you're doing is the template for the lesson, and then teachers would go back and do that. Oh, and by the way, many of those things may be getting created right now because of the follow-up from Jen's Tech Tools session, right? So you might say, oh, we need a Desmos for this activity, and then when we have our database together, you find that one has already been created. Okay, so the work that you're doing as follow-up for the Tech Tools session really supports this session as well. Okay, so moving forward, I do want to let you know what else we're going to do to help you think through this whole blended and distance learning thing. We did have a model for a community of practice last year, and we're going to change that up a bit this year. We are going to build a professional learning community around this course, and you are invited to be a part of it in whichever way makes sense for you. And we're not 100% certain what that looks like. We have some ideas, but I started to say what we think sitting in Olympia, but neither Jen or I are sitting in Olympia these days. But what we think of from our homes and what it looks like you from your school perspective might be different. One of the silver linings of working in a virtual format is that it doesn't matter where you are. So we can think about what that looks like virtually, and we can connect whether you are in Tonasket or Wenatchee or Pasco or Seattle or wherever it is that you are.